Good evening, and welcome to our second webinar entitled Conversations from the Capitol. This is a series of webinars featuring American Ismailis who have been active in local, state, and federal politics and policy. My name is Zach Karim. I'm a volunteer on the Council for the Northeast as a member for Communications and Publications. Tonight, we are very excited to have Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of National Security Institute at George Mason Law School, to moderate a conversation with Sophia Lalani, Defense and Foreign Policy Advisor to U.S. Senator Cory Booker. The format of tonight's session will be a moderated discussion for about 35 to 40 minutes, followed by a question and answer period that will go on until around 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Reminder, please use the question and answer function to submit your questions for Sophia. As well, the best way to view this is using the gallery view on your computer. With that said, let me pass it over to Jamil and Sophia. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. Sophia, great to be here with you. Last week when we had, or 2 weeks ago when we had the first one of these conversations with the Capitol, we talked to Mir Valiani, who worked in the Obama White House on similar national security issues to what you work on in the U.S. Senate for Senator Cory Booker. And the first question we asked her, and I'd love to start with the same first question to you, what was that moment when you were working that job where you think to yourself, I cannot believe that I'm here in this moment with my boss having this conversation in your job? Tell us about that moment.
Jamil, really good to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me to do this. So I've been working for Senator Booker for about 6 years, but 2 years ago, I felt that moment. So literally almost exactly 2 years ago, Senator Booker and I went to Afghanistan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Paris. So because he's on the Foreign Relations Committee, there we are in Afghanistan, because he's on the Foreign Relations Committee, he travels a lot to visit countries, et cetera. And so, as his staffer, I'm the one responsible for planning those trips. And so we ended up going to those 4 countries in 6 days. And I've traveled with him to 16 countries at this point. So I know his pace, and I know what he literally didn't want to sleep in hotels or in the compounds. He wanted to use the overnight flight as our rest to get to the next place. So we would be like red-eyeing it to every single country, essentially.
Right.
And this, usually we do this, but this time I was 25 weeks pregnant. So I was just very, very tired. So we land in Turkey. It is, it's 6 p.m. We go straight into a meeting with USAID, and our purpose for being there was to understand U.S. assistance to Syrian refugees in Northeast Syria. And there have been starting to be press reports coming out about the Trump administration cutting off humanitarian assistance to that part of Syria. And they were talking to us about what that humanitarian assistance does, right? So it provides maternal health, nutrition for children, shelter, et cetera. And so we're listening to all this stuff that U.S. assistance provides. And that was more informational, right? And as we go from there, we go to Afghanistan, and we land in Afghanistan. And the first day we met with the U.S. Ambassador, General Nicholson, who I'm sure you know, who's the U.S. and NATO force commander. We met with the National Security Advisor to President Ghani. We met with Afghan journalists that were really risking their life to report on what was happening throughout Afghanistan and sort of the fight with the Taliban. And then later in the day, we took a helicopter, which is I think where that picture's from. Yeah. We took a helicopter from Kabul to Bagram Air Base, which is just north of Kabul. And we're in the helicopter, and all the windows are down, and there's 4 gunners, right, on each side.
Like hanging out of the windows, right?
Hanging out of the window. And so, Senator Booker and I are just looking down because Afghanistan is mountainous, as you know, and it's just empty. It's just swaths of land, right, that are just empty, and we're just looking down. And we go and we meet with the troops at Bagram, talk about, you know, how the fight against the Taliban is going. We talk about some classified things. We leave, we come back to Kabul, and that night he has an iftar dinner with young women that are sort of trying to lead change and women's rights in Kabul. And that dinner was hosted by U.S. Ambassador Bass. And so, you know, this whole experience happens in Afghanistan, and I am just on, right? Because the senator can turn to you at any minute and say, you know, what's the population of this? And what does this mean?
Right.
And, you know, when did we sign this? And how much money is the U.S. giving to this? And, you know, all of this stuff. So, you know, my mind is just like racing constantly.
And you're going on no sleep, and you're on these crazy helicopter flights. Yeah.
And no sleep, and also no coffee. And then I got yelled at for being there because they looked at me and they were like, "You're pregnant." And I said, "Yep, I'm pregnant." And they actually, one of the generals got upset with me. He's like, "You're not supposed to be here." And my boss just kind of looked at him like, "This is my staffer. She's going to be here." But, you know, apparently they don't want pregnant women in war zones. But, so we dealt with that. And then we went on to Lebanon. And in Lebanon, you know, that was also just fascinating. We met with one of the two most vivid memories I have of Lebanon are going into a UNHCR refugee camp, so a camp full of Syrians that had fled Bashar al-Assad. And Senator Booker gets on the floor, cross-legged, next to, in between two of the kids. It's a family's shelter tent. Yeah. And then I sit next to one of the girls, and we're just talking, and he's asking them about their you know, how they got to Lebanon, why they fled, why they needed to flee. And then we got in a car and we went to go meet with Prime Minister Hariri. And we were in the room with the Prime Minister, and he took out, you know, what looks like a tasbih and is using the tasbih because he said it's Ramadan, right? And so he hadn't eaten all day, and he was talking about that. And, you know, whatever, 12 hours later, we get in another SUV and we fly back to the United States. And I don't know if it was because I was exhausted or because I was pregnant or whatever. I just realized in that moment how indispensable the U.S. is in every single one of those countries. Yeah. I mean, the money that the U.S. government was giving to Syrian refugees that were stuck in this little part of I guess they were displaced Syrians that were stuck in this little part of Northeast Syria. I mean, that meant that a mother could deliver a baby in sanitary conditions versus on the floor by herself somewhere. That meant food for young children. In Afghanistan, that meant, you know, over $500 million in foreign assistance and billions of dollars of security assistance to the Afghan forces to fight the Taliban. And then that meant another hundreds of millions of dollars of humanitarian funding to the Lebanese, who are just being crushed by the needs of Syrian refugees. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that, you know, because of the crush of refugees, both from Palestinian territories and from Syria, I mean, Lebanon could have collapsed. And so it was
pretty much is right now.
Totally. So I think it was I hadn't felt it that much before. You know, there's just the stark differences between meeting with the Prime Minister and Syrian refugees within an hour of each other, right? Going in a helicopter and meeting with Afghan journalists and women that are trying to, you know, agitate for women's rights in Afghanistan. The meetings were so stark and so different, but we were there in every one of those contexts, and none of that would have. Maybe other donors would have stepped in, but it wouldn't have happened that way if the U.S. wasn't there.
So let's talk about that. So you go to these meetings, you meet with all these people, you come back to the U.S. and you're discussing policy with your boss. You know, how you should vote in the Foreign Relations Committee, how you should vote on the Senate floor on some of these issues, things he should introduce, and things that he should say, and questions he should ask of USAID or State Department or the Department of Defense. Can you talk to us about a time when you felt like you or your boss had a measurable impact on the foreign policy of the U.S. government and these huge amounts of aid that are going to, the refugee camp you went to in Lebanon? There's one in Kilis in Turkey, right? In Jordan, right on the border, at Zatri, right? I mean, this is one of many. And so talk to us about where you feel like either you and or your boss had an impact on these issues and it sort of made a translatable difference to outcomes somewhere else in the world.
So Senator Booker is the most junior member of the committee. And so, one of the most senior members on the committee want to take like the big ticket items, right? Like they want to work on Afghanistan. They want to work on Turkey. They want, and Libya, like, those senior guy, and they're all guys, the senior ones are, they're working on like the core, the big ticket items. And, when Senator Booker came in, he became the ranking member, which is like sort of the vice chairman of the Africa subcommittee. Right. And so we and that's like the one where, like, who knows who really wants it, because there's not really a lot of a lot of policy discussions. There's no like major like counterterrorism operation. It's not like a sexy thing to talk about, usually. So, right. He took it
even
on.
Though the work matters, even though the work matters a lot, right?
Yes. I think Africa is going to be a really interesting place to watch, especially over the coming years. So we looked at Africa. I mean, it's sub-Saharan Africa, and we looked at what region we thought we could have just impact. And he sort of chose the Central Africa region, so sort of Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, and Sudan, where DRC and South Sudan are the biggest, refugee and humanitarian crises in the continent of Africa. DRC, I think in 2018, reported more refugees than Syria did, and nobody talks about it, and nobody knows about it. And so, the senator and I talked, I said, listen, like, this is what's going on in Congo. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody knows about it. There's no attention being paid to it. And so we really, took, like, for the first 2 years, we just focused a lot of energy on drawing attention to the Congo. And the thing that we really focused on was the election. Kabila had been in office for decades.
Forever.
And we started, writing to Kabila. We wrote up resolutions. We said there was an election coming up, and we said, like, you need to step down. Like, you need to enable a transition of power. Elections were delayed, but they ended up having elections, and there was a transition of power. I think that there were enough voices that had been galvanized to put pressure on Kabila to finally step down. And it was like tectonic, right? For DRC, Kabila stepping down, I mean, was huge. So I think that was one. I was really, it wasn't super the outcome that we wanted, but it was better Kabila staying. The other just, awful humanitarian crisis in sort of Central and East Africa is South Sudan. Over 400,000 people have died in their civil war since 2013. There's millions of refugees. In one study, I think there was like 65% of women had experienced gender-based violence.
In South Sudan.
In South Sudan. I mean, like the levels of violence against women. I mean, it's a weapon of war there, right? Yeah. And it's just a horrible protracted crisis that wasn't going to go away without the U.S. like really pushing the parties in the right direction. And we were making progress, I think, with Norway and the UK, but the Trump administration pulled the envoy, the sort of envoy to end the war in South Sudan. And it was just very clear that the violence was getting worse. They were so far away from a solution that we just realized that an envoy was needed. And so we got together a group of senators and we pushed Pompeo. We sent letters to Trump asking for a special envoy to sort of bring the parties together and try to move the peace process forward. We got an envoy out of that, and now there's been a peace deal. I mean, I don't know if that all is all like, correlated,
But it
you know,
had
we
an impact.
feel that we've been
Yeah.
able to make a difference there.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. So, you mentioned that your boss at the time, the junior senator on the Foreign Relations Committee, but of course, he also ran for president, recently. What was it like working in a Senate office on foreign policy and national security official issues for somebody running for president? Like, what is that like?
You know, it's tough because he wasn't there, you know, a lot. He had to miss a lot of votes because he was running for president, and so what that meant was we had to make sure that his voice on issues that he cared about was still there, right? So you can speak to this as well, Jamil. I think senators get pretty territorial about the issues that they own. You know, like some members are like, you know, I own women's issues, or I own veterans healthcare, or I own K through 12. You know, and so, you know, there had been, you know, like issue areas that the senator had sort of carved out for himself. And we just had to make sure that his voice was still active and present, even without member time. Right. And so it was tough. It was almost like more work in some ways, just because we had to like push against a lot of like headwinds to make sure that like we were getting his message through.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I also, you know, volunteered, as you know, most campaign staffers are volunteers. So I volunteered as the foreign policy advisor on the campaign staff as well.
Right. Got it. So let's just step backwards for a minute. How did you end up coming to work for Senator Booker on these foreign policy and national security issues? How does that happen?
You know, I took like
was there a plan? Like, did you always want to do this? Like, is this what you always, it's like this is the job you always wanted to have?
So, I mean, I moved to DC like 7 years ago, just knowing my sister, Alicia, my cousin Sabine, and like my then boyfriend, now husband. And like, I just moved here not knowing what I was going to do. And, you know, I just had to create a network from the ground up, and just really talk to people about what my experiences had been. And just, you know, to go backward, when I left college, I did the Teach for America Corps. I was in New York City as a 6th through 8th ESL and bilingual teacher in the South Bronx. I did that, and then I, you know, was just really taken by how, you know, my students' environment really influenced their lives and then the sort of experience that they had. And so I ended up doing, you know, a master's in urban planning and design, and then went to do a TKN in Karachi with the Aga Khan University.
So let's stop there before you get past that. So okay, so you go to college. You go do Teach for America. You then go do a degree in urban planning. Then you go do a TKN. I want to hear about the TKN. I'm trying to figure out. So what's the path then to Cory Booker? And like before that, you worked for Senator Coons. You were a foreign policy fellow there. Like, did your work in the TKN have something to do with this? How did that transition happen, going from being a teacher to being a foreign policy national security advisor at the U.S. Senate, you know, to a presidential candidate of all things?
Yeah, I mean, so the people always ask me that, and I always tell them, listen, you know, this was, some people go into, you know, that are on Capitol Hill are like, this is what I wanted to do my entire life.
Right.
I am not one of those people. We just sort of found myself there. And, you know,
not a bad place to find yourself. I mean, like, you know, worked out pretty well.
Yeah, no, it's been fun. You know, the transition, I think, from I knew that I didn't want to be, I wasn't going to be in the classroom forever. I think that I looked at the Teach for America model. I knew what it was. I knew it was a 2-year commitment. And I knew how, honestly, I think it was, you know, the imams just like focus on education as your ticket in life, right? And Teach for America really sends you to just areas that are, you know, really tough. I mean, I taught 8th grade. One of my 15-year-olds was, I had a 15-year-old 8th grader that was pregnant by October. And she delivered, I had to basically kick her out of my class to like go deliver her child because she would not leave my classroom. It was a tough neighborhood, and the experiences my students were having were really tough.
Yeah.
And I think I saw in that experience, again, what How's Your Mom talks a lot about is how place gives people dignity, right? So for example, I took my kids on a field trip to Manhattan, and they were so we went from the Bronx to Manhattan. They were super well behaved in Manhattan. It's like, you guys, what is going on? Like, why aren't you guys going nuts?
Yeah.
And they were like, they just understood the seriousness of Manhattan. They're like, understood that there were like no shenanigans in Manhattan. And they were like, I was like, what is it that you guys why are you guys so much better behaved than in the Bronx? I said, nobody cares about the Bronx. It's dirty. It's, like, it's just full of cops and bad stuff. And so, in that moment, I just realized how much place provides dignity. And, you really need to dignify a person. You can dignify a person with their environment and their sort of quality of life. And so that really struck a chord with me. It was just seeing how just, the interaction and their demeanor was just so different by being in a place that like was like, it was like serious.
Right.
And so that was the transition there. I think my TKN was, they actually brought me on because of my urban planning background, because they were doing a study of how AKU has developed and changed and how the campus has grown. And they were
in Karachi.
In Karachi.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it ended up being more of like a historical sort of look back at AKU's development. Okay. And then from there, I actually got picked up by IOM and CSO to do some actual like mapping for them on where USAID money was going.
So that's the State Department.
USAID first, USAID, then I was brought on to CSO. Where their projects were in Somalia, and they were basically wanted to use like my mapping, my GIS/design skills to do that. And then I came back to the States, and I didn't know where to go. Like I ended up in DC, didn't have a job, 3 friends, and was just pounding the pavement, and ended up. It was a different time back then, though, Jamil. Right? Like Obama was in the White House. The Democrats had the majority. There were jobs to go around for Democrats, and so I think I got lucky.
Yeah. So it sort of does have sort of theme, right? Where you sort of you're learning from your kids. You're learning about the dignity of place. You go to your degree in urban planning. That gets you and ending up on a TKN at AKU. That leads to USAID and state, and then you're doing foreign policy. You're in DC. Senator Coons, Senator Booker. Here you are on a helicopter going from Kabul to Bagram, right? Going to meet the Prime Minister of Lebanon. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? If you think about it. So let's keep thinking about this. So I'm really interested in this issue of your TKN and how that shaped your life. But I also am interested to know, so you're in these jobs, right? And you're meeting with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and you're with Senator Booker representing the United States in Afghanistan. But you're a Muslim, and you're a Muslim woman, and you're working on foreign policy, national security issues. What is that like? What is that? I mean, I don't want to ask an uncomfortable question, but did you ever feel like that was a problem or a challenge or a benefit when you're in these conversations and when you're providing this advice? Did anyone look at you differently? Did you ever feel like, somebody's wondering, well, I should have this security clearance or this classified briefing because I'm Muslim or I'm a Muslim woman? Like what talk to us about that sort of dynamic in this whole process that you've been through. And by the way, just for folks in the audience, we will take questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A function, and about 10 minutes or so, we'll turn to your questions. So what about that?
So I will say, I actually talk about being Muslim quite a bit at work. Everybody knows, Friday night, I can't do anything after work because I'm going to mosque. When it's Eid, I ask for the day off, or at least the morning off. When it's Kushali, they know I'm leaving early, right? Like I talk about it a lot. Like it's not like a secret. And so, I think that was actually like a benefit because we are so underrepresented in the Senate for sure. And so they sort of looked at me as like like Democrats want to be a big tent inclusive party. I don't know if I'm making an overgeneralization, but I mean, that's the sense that I have. And so, there was some, I felt, at least there was some sense of excitement that like, oh my God, there's actually a woman that self-describes herself as Muslim, that has shown up here, that is, has the skills, has a background that could be, that we could hire, right? Like, it's actually something that was like very much, I think, an asset for me. And I didn't realize it back then, but I realize it now.
Right.
And, again, I mean, the security clearance and all that, I didn't worry about that as much at all as, I think the first time that I got sort of nervous was, I knew that like the office like closed for Passover and some of the other like Jewish high holidays. And I went to go talk to my boss and I said, I think I want kushali off, and so
does he know what kushali is, right? Because Eid is one thing, right? And say I'm going to go to mosque is one thing, right? It's another thing to say I'm going to Jamaat Khana or I'm taking kushali off. Like, how does that conversation go as an Ismaili Muslim?
I mean, I talked about the Aga Khan. I had him tweet about Kushali Mubarak. He tweeted Kushali Mubarak one year.
There's the measurable impact right there, right?
Yeah. Yes. And then one of the comments in the Twitter box was, I don't know any of the words that you said, but yes. So yeah, I mean, and so like I was nervous about that.
Yeah. How'd it go?
Huh?
How'd it go?
Oh yeah. I mean, they were like, oh yeah, take however many, take all the days, like it was like, they wanted to be so inclusive.
Right.
So yeah. And they're like, oh, and then going forward, if there are any other holidays that we don't know about, please ask for them off, So, the first conversation is just like, whatever. You think it's going to be uncomfortable, but
it's not.
But it's not.
Right.
Honestly, I think it's the woman thing that I think is, and from being in the national security space yourself, Jamal, it's a male dominated environment. And I want to tell the story about my first trip back out on the road. It was 6-7 months after I had my son.
Okay.
And it was a trip to Strachan in Nebraska. And then we went up to Elmendorf in Alaska, in Anchorage. And,
the nuclear missile tour.
Oh yeah, we were looking at our missile defense systems, and I knew I needed to take. I was like, this is a trip that I haven't taken. I don't know Stratcom. I haven't been. I know I need to go. Yeah. It's like a missing piece of the defense picture for me, and so I like reluctantly signed up for this trip. It was 5 men and 4 men and me. And I was still nursing Reza because he was only 7 months old. And so, I told like we had a Marine or an Air Force export, or what is it?
Escort. Yeah, the person traveling with you, right? As your sort of military aide on the staff trip.
Exactly. And so I told him, I said, listen, in the briefings, I'm going to have to get up and like go out and pump. And he was like, oh, okay. And for the male military escort, right? Oh yeah. And I'm getting briefed by a 1-star and 2 1-star generals in front of me. And so I pick up my bag and I'm like, okay, I gotta go. And they just sort of like look around like,
a room full of men, and they're like trying to figure out what's happening here.
They're trying to figure out, because nobody's told them that this is what I'm gonna go do.
Right.
And, there's a staffer behind them that's trying to whisper in their ear, like, this is what she's doing. And they just get red in the face and just keep talking. Right. And it just keeps happening, like every meeting. Like, I'm like, okay, and it's uncomfortable for some. And then I think it was the second meeting into the day, my name tag actually said Mr. Lalani, because they assumed I was a man.
Right.
Yeah, they just assumed that I was going to be a guy. So, it was uncomfortable for everyone.
Yeah.
But I realized, and this is something that my boss likes to say, the reason that he is a Black man elected to the Senate is because he stood on the shoulders of Black civil rights leaders of the past.
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about like how uncomfortable I was making them feel and how was it worth it to do this, I thought to myself, I am standing on the shoulders of women that fought for maternity leave, for nursing rooms, for paid leave, for all of these things. And they wouldn't have gotten any of those things without making people uncomfortable and
Yeah.
without asking for it. So I think that was, and also like, grappling with yourself about like, this is just too much work. It'd just be easier for me to stay back and not go on this trip. But you sort of need to like, push yourself, because like a guy doesn't have to do that to make those considerations to go on this trip. And so you need to sort of like advocate for yourself. I think much more as a woman in these situations.
Yeah, and people will stand on your shoulders now, having gone through that, right? The next time this happens, it'll be less awkward for the next one who comes into this scenario, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, well, we can all hope. So let's talk about standing on other people's shoulders, though. So, one of the things, you obviously come from an immigrant community, right, to the United States. What role did that, if anything, play in you getting into this job or taking this job? Was it a stumbling block? Did it get in the way of you sort of working in politics and federal government? When we talked to Amira last week, 2 weeks ago, she said, that her parents didn't really understand why she would want to go work, in the government and work on national security issues. They all kept sort of asking her, like, when are you getting a real job? So what about you? Was your experience anything like that? And if so, like, talk to us about like how that played out in your experience.
Well, I think, like the immigrant dream is to, move to America. I mean, listen, I wasn't born in the States, right? Like the immigrant dream is to move to America and like own your house and take care of your family and all of those things to like make it, right? Nobody.
Yeah.
And the thing is, nobody goes into this job to be a millionaire, right? This is, from working in the Senate, Jamil, we are extremely underpaid and overworked. And you do get all these questions of like, all right, when are you going to cash in on all the fancy degrees, right? Like, and so, it can be sometimes a sacrifice for your family. To do this, and you do get a lot of questions like, why are you working so much? And you're like, not getting paid that well, like, what's driving you? And it is a desire for, either public service to have a voice, or to be able to influence U.S. policy in a very direct way, in a very intimate way.
Right.
And to sort of be in the room when those decisions are being made. And so like,
or on the helicopter, as it were.
Or in the helicopter. And so, that's been my, I think, calculus has been, number one, I mean, I don't even know if I'm like, I think I'm definitely the only Smiley right now in the Senate. But,
we have a few in the House. Yeah,
we have a few in the House. And so, to have, to be able to have this experience, and to really understand the levers of the U.S. government and U.S. foreign policy is it's more than I could have ever dreamt, and I think it's become part of my immigrant story, right? Like, who would have thought that a girl, not even a woman, not even born in this country, could come here and work for a U.S. senator that ran for president? Like, I wouldn't have ever. And
get read into some of the most highly classified programs of the U.S. government, right? Pretty amazing.
Sorry, Jamil, you broke up for a minute.
Yeah, sorry about that. And have a chance to have a security clearance that gets you read into some of the most, classified, programs in the government.
Oh, I heard classified. What did you say before that?
Sorry about that. I guess we might be having some internet issues. You got me now?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And not only being an immigrant woman working in the Senate, and for a presidential candidate, but getting read into highly classified programs, some of the most sensitive information the U.S. government has, right? I mean, that must be pretty crazy.
It is. When we were, I think you were in the Senate during the Iran nuclear deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just remember when, the senator was trying to decide on whether to vote for the resolution of disapproval of the JCPOA, of the Iran nuclear deal. He just asked me to set up meeting after meeting with experts for him to like try to figure out how he was going to vote. And we were in the secure classified information space. Yeah. It's called the SCIF.
SCIF. Yeah.
So we had we had somebody from like DOD, CIA, NSA, like just cycle through, right? Like we're sitting in the SCIF. I mean, the senator was so stressed out about making this decision, and we were just like so steeped in like all this like classified material, in order to like make this decision. I mean, he didn't eat for 12 hours straight. I mean, like we were just in that room for 12 hours straight. And so it can be intense, and it can be literally a matter of it was like a really grave matter for him. And he took it very, very seriously. And so it required that level of information.
Yeah. So, but then you leave the skiff, right? You come out and you go home, and you've got a family at home, and you go to Jamaat Khana, and you've been working the Iran nuclear deal, listening to people from the CIA tell you about how the nuclear weapons are being designed in Iran or not being designed, and whether they're going to comply with the deal or not. And you can't talk to anybody about it, right? Like, what about that disconnect? Like, is that weird?
Oh, my husband tries. He's like, just tell me. You can tell me.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I try to leave it behind me. I mean, we all work from home, but in that space, like that, I try to leave the skiff stuff in the skiff as much as I can. And I try, on the humanitarian need in South Sudan, I'll talk about that all day at home, but that stuff I'll try to just compartmentalize and leave.
Right. So look, I said we'd turn to questions at 9:40, and I really want to do it. We've got 14 questions already in the queue, so we're not going to get to everybody, unfortunately. I apologize, but we'll get to as many of them as we can. So let's just start right at the top. So Zubair Merchant asks, do you have any advice for an experienced campaign staffer who wants to transition to working for an elected official on the Hill? And I think I want to expand that question. What about, what do you say to the average student or college student or college graduate out there who says, hey, I want to do what you're doing. That sounds awesome. Being on the helicopter to Bagram and, advising Senator Booker about his vote on the Iran nuclear deal and being in the classified room talking to the CIA. How do you get there from where people are, if they're on a campaign staff or if they're, just graduating from college? Like, what do they do next? I realize your path was sort of, different, right? But talk about what advice you give somebody, who's out there today.
So, I mean, we've had a lot of campaign staff from the senator's presidential campaign come to the office. I think we had like 14 staff from his presidential race come in.
Yeah.
So that is actually like a really great way. I mean, if your member wins and has a seat in either Congress or in the Senate, like that's a great way to try to come in. I think there's a lot of, I think that there are organizations that will help campaign staffers transition, but you have to make the ask, right? Like you have to, I mean, the member has to know that you're interested. And some staffers just like, some campaign staffers are like, oh, I don't want to, like, you have to say that you're interested in the policy, or you'll just be sort of stuck in the political route. Like, right, for Congress, there's definitely a political route and there's a policy route. I'm hard on the policy route. Like I could never, I'm not a campaign person. And so like you have to be willing to talk to people about making that transition from the political to the policy.
Yeah. So Reza Ali asks sort of a variant of a question we talked about a little bit earlier. So, when you're occupying a space not traditionally held by Ismailis, and I'd expand it to Muslims generally, right? How do you maintain your unique identity without sort of whitewashing down your identity so other people, the majority, can understand you or where you come from?
I think that I think that's a really good question. I sort of, it's not like I'm unloading my life. Like I'm like not saying, hi, I'm Sophia, I'm Muslim, right? Like I start with the people that I talk to a lot or I trust, right? And so like, the people that I like spent a lot of time with in my office that I was like regularly getting, coffee with, those are the people I started with, and like, they're like, oh, what are you doing on Friday nights? Like, oh, I'm going to mosque. I'm like, what? I didn't know that. And like, it's, you sort of start to meet them where they are. And then if they want to dig deeper, like, tell them. And so I'm not like, I certainly don't, just, spill my guts about, how being an Ismaili is, all these things.
Right.
But it is, you start with people that that you trust and that you have a relationship with, and you meet them where they are, and then you start there.
Yeah. So Noreen Hashim asks, as a policy advisor or staffer, how do you juggle your own ideas with the senators, Senator Booker or Senator Coons, who you worked for before, when they don't align? What happens when you're not in the same place as your boss is, right? who wins? How do you argue for your position? Like how does that play out?
That's a great question. I mean, there's several things that I'm personally in a different spot, not several, but a few things that I'm personally in a different place than my boss on. And your job is to be your boss's, I wouldn't say advocate, but like your boss's brains on a certain issue, right? And so even if you, let's say you don't think, he does not believe that the US should be sending $550 million a year to Afghanistan, and he wants to see a cutoff in funding, you might personally not agree with that because, you know that there are tons of Ismailis that live there, that, some of this money might be trickling down to them, whatever your position is, you don't agree with that. You have to go out and write the best possible position for cutting funding to Afghanistan. That is just the job. And like, you have to be able to do it, and you have to be willing to do it. And if you don't do it, then like, you're not being a good, I mean, you can make the countervailing point, right? Like you can
do you? I mean, is that appropriate? Is it okay to say, well, I'm not sure this is the right, here's a couple other ideas. Like, is that okay to do that?
I mean, I have now worked for Senator Booker for 6 years. I tell him when it's not a good idea. He's like, okay, well, what about doing this? I'm like, I don't know about that.
Right.
I'll say like, maybe we could try this. And then if he's like, no, I want to do this. And I'm like, okay, we're doing that. And so, I think even with Senator Coons, I would, I'd say, I don't know about that. What about this? Or we would have a conversation. But when their mind is made up, like you go and write the best thing you can about
for their position.
Yeah.
An anonymous attendee asks, how do you respond to calls, this is happening on both sides of the aisle, right? Favoring more isolationist foreign policy, right? Those are saying our fates aren't really intertwined with those out there, the people in the refugee crises, or, it's not worth our tax money, right? We've got COVID here. We got all these problems in America. Like, let's not send all that money overseas. How do you deal with sort of that trend in the political arena, on both sides of the aisle?
That's a really good question. And I think that this is like definitely playing out right now with COVID, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've only passed something like $1.5 to $2 billion in foreign assistance with all the COVID packages.
Yeah.
And so, our foreign assistance is like way down compared, relatively. Because usually I think it's 1% to 2% of our total budget is foreign assistance, and so we're seeing the outcome of that right now, and it's a weird time because I think because COVID has hit the U.S. so fiercely that members are really focused on getting assistance to their states. And so I think that, I think we'll right size. I think we'll turn, I think once we get it under control here, we're going to realize that like COVID came from outside this country and it'll re-enter if we don't control it outside our country again.
Right.
And so I think we will pivot, but I think you're absolutely right to say right now we're just so focused internally that, COVID might be raging in Africa or Latin America and other places, and we're just not we're not taking up our traditional global leadership position and trying to help those health systems strengthen and fight COVID. I think just generally, the U.S. is talking about not paying dues to certain UN agencies. We're in arrears, which means we're behind on payments to certain UN agencies. I think it lessens our voice in the international systems. I mean, the U.S. was part of setting up the post-World War II international system and the international order that currently exists. And I think that there is a real sense that we are doing damage to our standing in sort of in like vilifying those institutions and scapegoating them for other issues.
Yeah. Well, so on a related note, Noreen Hashim asks, what kind of international collaboration are you working on, on these issues, on globally addressing the pandemic and the like? We know, obviously, the U.S. has pulled out of, at least temporarily, out of the World Health Organization, maybe permanently. What is your boss, or what is the Senate working on, thinking on these sort of issues? And is that a place where sort of you or other people who want to be influential can play a role?
I mean, currently, right, I mean, I'm going to be honest, it is all COVID all the time, right? Like, I think the big things that we're looking at is the U.S. peace deal with the Taliban. That's like a big ticket.
The peace deal, right?
The peace deal where civilian casualties are rising.
Yeah. Maternity wards being attacked.
I'm sorry, who's being attacked?
Maternity wards.
Maternity wards are being attacked. The Afghan government and Taliban are not actually sitting down to talk, and they're not even doing the first basic step of the peace deal. So, there are, at the same time, the voices of saying that U.S. needs to withdraw from Afghanistan, like we just need to like drop everything and get out, are growing louder. And so, I think we're going to have to pivot and not pivot, but like at least turn and do some like crisis management there. Pretty soon, because the peace deal is sort of falling apart, and there's no real attention being paid to it. I think sort of the other major issue that we're looking at is Libya, and like the potential fragmentation of Libya. And then the other major issue, so two more, I think. One is just the humanitarian crises, and just the worsening crises that we're looking at, and just how donor funding is just like drying up, putting more people on the brink of starvation / really dangerous situations. And then I think the food security issues are going to be really bad, particularly in Africa and in South Asia. So we're looking at India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, having major, and most of sub-Saharan Africa having major food security issues toward the end of this year, like catastrophic.
Wow. Yeah. So an interesting question. Hussein Mohammed says, as a Muslim American soldier, I've worked with various political organizations. What do you think is the best way to sort of end the war in the Middle East? You sort of talked about how we have this movement in the U.S. that really wants to get out of Afghanistan, right? Other places, and on both sides of the aisle, right? I mean, this is a bipartisan issue. At the same time, there are very real security issues. How do you sort of think through those, and how do you see that playing out? And what can you tell us about that?
So I think that there, like I said, I think that there are voices calling from a really quick troop withdrawal, especially as I think we look to where we can find, cut spending, because we're going to need to raise money to pay for all our COVID relief. And so, that sucks up a lot of money, right? Like our troop presence in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Poland, in, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, that is, I don't know if you remember this, Jamel, but, in one hearing, it was like the number was like $45 billion a year in spending on the war on terror. And I think with the emergence of sort of like really progressive politics and policies, you're starting to see just calls for a drawdown come hell or high water, right? And so there are going to be people on I think scattered on the spectrum saying like we need to leave right now no matter what. There are going to be people that are saying we need to stay because these places are still threats to U.S. national security, and I'm not going to be responsible for another 9/11. And then there are people that are going to try to come up with like a middle ground, right? Like how can we continue to train Afghan forces for them to be capable and to defend their own territory? How do we get the Afghans and the Taliban to sit together and come up with a ceasefire, and then do like a conditions-based or staggered withdrawal, right? So I think that those conversations are only going to get louder, and I think you're going to see the war on terrorism or the war on terror was just so strongly bipartisan, right? Like that was like a rallying cry for the entire country after 9/11. That has really changed, right? Like you are seeing a lot of splits in like ideology on this issue. And so I think that that's only going to get bigger.
Yeah. So a couple of folks have asked, how do you gain the experience that you need from prior jobs for these jobs you've been in? You talked about this path that you took, and it's not. Do you need to sort of does there need to be a particular path? Do you have to get on some trail to these experiences to get that job? Is that, how do you do that?
I don't know. I mean, I think I've met people sort of all over, right? I've met people that have taken like a very traditional path, like went to college, got out, became a staff assistant in the front, worked their way up to LC, their legislative correspondence, worked their way up to legislative aide, then became an advisor, and then, the legislative director. And they've been, my previous chief of staff was like that, right? Like she was literally like first job out of college, she's been in Congress. And like, she's been in Congress since she was, 22, and she's now 37, right? Like, she's been there the entire time. And like, there are a significant number of people like that, right? And that's like a very scripted path. Right. There are other people like me who just, sort of come out from nowhere. And then, there's like Ben Rhodes, he has a master's in what is it, in like writing. Yeah. And so, like, and Ben Rhodes was the deputy national security advisor for President Obama. And, he got to start working on the 9/11 Commission. Right. And, using his writing skills. And so, I've seen both. I think I've seen both, but I think if and when you decide that you want to work, let's say in Congress or in the Senate or in the House, it does take, a mix of luck, of just really like, once you make the decision, like you need to like pound the paper and like do it, right? Because you got a lot of people. I think anybody
a lot of coffees.
Oh, so many copies. Everybody's highly caffeinated in Congress. Right. But I think people that are on this call that are from DC will know this is a city that thrives on networks, and people are highly networked and continue to do so. And so that is exactly what it takes. I think it takes a continued sort of reaching out to people, talking to them. What have you heard? Are there like things that are open? Oh, can you introduce me to this person? It is just a lot of that. And there is a formula, but it can be tough. Or
yeah, no, that makes sense. So we got about 5 minutes left, and I'm going to try to get a few more questions. And we are going to end on time, respectful of your time and out of our audience. We've kept almost over 120 people here this whole time. Pretty amazing. So on this question of sort of, all the time you need to put in to get these jobs and move up in these jobs, how do you balance between living in DC and getting involved, going to Jamaat, kind of remaining in country with your faith? You have a young child at home, right? How do you balance the sort of work-life thing? How do you bring all that together and still manage to, spend tons of hours working with Senator Booker, go to Afghanistan, get on helicopters and meet with the Prime Minister of Lebanon and come back? And how do you balance all those things? And how can other people think about balancing those things?
It becomes different, right? Like before I had my son, I mean, I'm going to be honest. My husband and I both ate all 3 meals at our desks. Like we were working all the time, and you can't do that, right? If you want to see your child and you want your child to know you, like, I had to start leaving work at 6 o'clock, and even that was a little late. It does take a lot of, there are definitely trade-offs to be made. And when you do need to just put in those extra hours at work, you need to have in my case, I have a very supportive spouse that'll, take on some extra work or take on a lot of extra work for me, and a very supportive family that'll, when both of us are jammed and both of us have big things, that will, come to our rescue and come down and help us. And so, you do need to have a support system. There's no way that any of this could have happened without an incredibly supportive family and friends. I mean, today, I had a call at 10 a.m. and my husband had a call, and we were like, uh-oh, we have a toddler. And so I called my sister who lives a mile down and said, I'm
going to need you here. Yeah.
I need you. And so, she like rescheduled her own phone calls and her own meetings to come and help us out. And so, I'm going to be 100% honest, like none of this would happen without extremely supportive network. And I'm very, very blessed to have a family and spouse that are very, very, very supportive of my career decision and the sort of toll that it takes, or the support and stuff that's required. On the Jamaati front, I mean, listen, Jamaat Khana has always been a source of just like comfort and a place to go like breathe. And so, you know, I just didn't let it become like one more thing that you need to do, right? So like, was I going to be able to make it to Kane on a Friday? No, I haven't been to Kane on a Friday since he was born, probably. But we've changed it to going to Kane on a Sunday, so we can, you know, because Dua time is earlier, we can go to Kane as a family, and we can come home and still make that time or make it a little bit later. And so,
right.
You know, is it going to be exactly the same? No, but you know, you figure out the things that are important. For me, my job was important. Making sure that I continued to progress professionally was important. So even though it was more work to try to find a nanny or a daycare or whatever, and, you know, be a mom plus a full-time professional, plus, you know, go to Jamaat Khana, plus maybe work, you know, have some time to go work out or something. You have to, you know, juggle and sort of make those decisions. And it's not going to be perfect.
Right.
It's not going to look like it used to. Right. Like there's not going to be like going to Dandiya Ras when it starts at 8 o'clock, and you can't, like, you're not playing Dandiya until 8 o'clock at night anymore.
Right. Right.
I haven't played Dandiya in 2 years. So I hope
I hear you. Well, Sophia, listen, thanks a lot for doing this. I apologize to the folks whose questions we didn't get to today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Almost 120 people still with us. In the minute we have left, just once again want to thank you and want to remind folks that in 2 weeks from now, we'll have Ambassador Sada Cumber, the former ambassador to the Organization of Islamic Conference. So an amazing event coming up 2 weeks, same time, same place. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, the audience. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.